All right, welcome everyone from both Australia and New Zealand to the 14th day of May, where we're talking around another session of M365 for May. So just a couple of housekeeping items. There's a quick code of conduct. Being a live Teams event, we just want to make sure everyone's comments and feedback is constructive, also be respectful, and also, as always, be helpful and be kind to everyone. There is a long version if you want, just down the link down below. But basically what we want to talk about today is 7 tips to improve remote work and how to contain sprawl within Microsoft Teams. So basically in this session, I'm going to be walking you guys through some examples of what I've seen with other customers and how they've kind of dealt with the crisis at hand and how they've had to kind of now jump ship into Microsoft Teams. But also some quick tips of how to make it a lot better, that experience, but also trying to kind of put a sunshine into people's days after that Monday to Friday session that they have at home and making it just a little bit better. For any questions, feel free to type it in, but we'll address that at the end when we can. Just a little bit about myself. So my name is Victor Lay, and I work here at AvePoint in Melbourne. So I'm a solution engineer, and basically what that means is that I'll align or understand what the customers are coming from, where their pain points are, and where the direction is, where they're planning to go. And from there, I'll align a solution, either something natively or even with a conjoint bundle of solutions presented by AvePoint. What I work with is mainly the APAC region, so Melbourne mainly, but also Sydney, Queensland, WA as well. But with those little countries, I work with different companies such as mining, health, education, and government. So a whole broad spectrum, and kind of hear little bits and pieces, which when you present to those customers, they take the little golden nuggets that work best for them, but ultimately they all kind of work in different kind of methods. So as a quick agenda, basically just the working from home challenges, both from kind of 2 different perspectives. One, from the people that kind of keep the lights on, the IT side of things, but also the people that have to use that system on a day-to-day business, those end users. And then just going through those 7 different tips to help people understand what is Teams, what have we been dealt with, and how, from an IT side of things, how do we control some of those aspects of Teams so that it doesn't spread kind of like wildfire. And then questions at the end. All right, let's kick into it. All right, so here's kind of the hand we've been dealt with. Everyone at some stage, or even still now, I know we are now going a lot better in terms of our numbers with the cases, and also I've had some calls where people have their camera on and you see them in the office, which I'm very jealous of because I'm still stuck at home here in Melbourne. So hopefully we will get back to normal, but in this case, this is what we've dealt with and this is what we have to deal with. From an IT side of things, what we see is that people are coming from an on-premise location, and before this whole crisis, they were kind of thinking, we need to get into Teams. Teams is the next best thing since sliced bread. So Microsoft's pitching it. It's the way to go forward. It's going to help people collaborate. But due to the circumstances that we are in today, this has essentially fast-tracked. And what we've seen that evident across everything in the world. Officeworks, JB Hi-Fi, all that Office equipment is essentially sold out. People weren't prepared to be working from home for this extensive period, but the same goes for the organizations as well. So now that we've released Teams out into the big bad world, how does, from the IT side of things, the challenges that we see, how do we ensure that people are creating those locations in the correct manner, kind of to reduce sprawl? I've seen a lot of duplication of Teams, but also from a day-to-day business as well. How do we control what happens to those teams? These teams that we're using right now, they're going to be here for the long run. So as our company evolves, as we go back into the office, we want to make sure that those workspaces change with us as well as those policies and compliance that we need to be with. Lastly, how do we also making sure that we can clean up some of those workspaces as well by having a process to, I guess, delete those workspaces in a safe manner, but also have an auditing process to see the trail of what's happened to that team. Like with the time that we've been given and having to roll this out quickly, typically what I'd see is that we'd figure all these tasks out before rolling out something like Teams. However, because of what we have, it's just something that we've had to push out and kind of figure out later down the track. But also from an end user side of things, I've seen with other organizations that the adoption has just gone crazy, but people don't have that understanding or training, essentially how to use Teams to the best of its ability. And we still have the concept of still SharePoint, mail. Some organizations have private channels. What to use when and where. That's the confusing part. A lot of the time, Microsoft is still pitching that Teams perspective, and that might be the case where every time an end user goes ahead and wants to collaborate with one another, they just go ahead and create a team. And then from the other side of things, when you're creating a team as one of those end users, you essentially automatically as an owner, right? And as an owner, there's that scary concept of how do I invite people? Do I allow external sharing turned on, right? At what concept do I allow them to be invited at one point in time? So with these 7 tips, hopefully I'll give you guys some insights and kind of a crash course into answering some of these questions here. All right, so the very first tip is basically how to educate your users of what to use when and where, and especially with all the different objects that we have within Office 365. So basically, this is a pretty old slide that that's coming from Microsoft, and this is when they first introduced Teams, basically, and how it fits into the Microsoft ecosystem. So essentially, Teams is perfect for that in-the-loop communication. So you've got your projects, your meetings that you have with a small group or an office. That is perfect for that example there, right? Where you have a common goal, but it's not the wider organization. Microsoft now has introduced organizational-wide teams, so it can be used for those parts. But I'll see that more on the concept of for Yammer. Yammer would be a perfect place for things like your town halls, any corporate updates. So for example, at a point we'll have the weekly catch-ups with our CEO, right? And then we'll also have his town hall updates every quarter, just to see what's happening across the global business, how we're doing, things like that. But then there's still the concept of email, right? Email is never going anywhere, even though we always say that, with Teams, I've reduced the amount of emails that I have, but email is just here to stay. So email, that's perfect for your targeted communication. And I like to say it's when you want to have that formal communication where I can always go back and prove something there. It's always going to have that threaded email chain. So here are some quick examples of having that same kind of message where we've got the teams on the left, where basically you could have that threaded chat, tagging people, that conversation, right? But on the right side of the things, it's that same point of message, but it's just done by email. And as you can see, it's a bit more formalized, right? And I think that's perfect for when you want to talk to like someone a bit higher up, your manager, managing director, and anyone with a C-level title, or anyone outside the organization, such as like a customer or an external user, or something like that. Then we've got Yammer. Yammer, perfect for reaching out to the wider audience, right? So reaching out to the entire organization. So this would be a perfect example for, say you've just joined the company, right? You don't know really who to ask or who's an expert at what. So this is what I do. If I have a question around, one of the processes or one of the projects that we're doing, right? I'd post something in Yammer. This reaches out to the wide audience, and I'm not targeting anyone specific because I don't really know anyone. I'm still very green. Whereas Teams is perfect for that same communication, but you know specifically who you're after. So that way I can still tag people such as Bob Smith and Mark Davis just to ask them a couple questions. All right, So I've heard a lot of the conversations of now that we have Teams, there's still group chats, and now there's private channels. What to use when and where in this case? So group chats is pretty perfect for if you want to ask just a small group a quick question around clarification, like there's pretty much overkill for creating a team in case you do want to ask a question, or even just catching up over the weekend. Hey, what did you guys do up to? Most of the time, I just stayed at home. I maybe explore my backyard, but it's still good for those quick catch-ups. But what we ideally see is that email has reduced a significant amount, and the simple fact is because email essentially was that kind of annoying method of communication because of that reply all button. That reply all button that might have had the entire department or the entire office, everyone would get pinged that message. And from an IT side of things, you can see that threshold and that amount of data just skyrocket because everyone's just communicating with each other. And then you'll get other people that are just FYIing other people, increasing into that fire there. So this is kind of where I explain to customers that you could essentially do this this rich text communication just via Teams, where you can have things like your headings and you can separate it and kind of format it into a way that you want people to do specific actions. And then down below where you have that reply, you can then follow that threaded chat where, hey, someone has confirmed that they've done an action or they've acknowledged it. You can also still like things as well, and react to things if you do, or maybe dislike what you've been tasked to do. But that simplified communication, where we see that where traditionally where we use email can be pushed over to now your Teams posts. So just some pros around using Teams for that line of communication versus your email. Basically, with the team, it just makes it a bit more a seamless experience where everything's just essentially categorized for you. Within that Teams chat, it's all just kind of an internal communication, unless you kind of have those external users joining that channel or joining that post, right? And this experience, this kind of instant messaging experience, it's something that we grew up with. It's something that we're way used to anyways, right? So like back in the days of Skype and MSN, and nowadays with things like Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp, it's something that we always used. So like back in my childhood, I never remember emailing my best friend in primary school, hey, could I come over for just to play some games, and then emailing my mum, hey, I'm just going over there to study. Like I just ping him or I text him or message him over MSN, right? So it's just something that we're used to, and it's just something ingrained into how we've grown up. All right, and now kind of Teams has introduced this concept of where you could actually email a channel instead. So this is one of the ways that I've seen people trying to drive that adoption, especially for those that are wedded to emails. So I had this one experience where someone has started a conversation through email, but basically what one of the managers did is that they copied that email and basically pasted it and emailed the channel itself and continued that thread there. So basically they responded that email into Teams. And that's a way that I've seen drive that adoption, where you kind of do it from the very top level. And that way no one kind of questions it. You don't want to be that guy that responds by email when your direct line manager is doing it over Teams. It kind of disjoints the whole thing, right? What we have at our point is a couple of eBooks and webinars that can provide a bit more information around this, the what to use when and where, and it provides a nice chart that explains kind of the different workloads, within Office 365, like Teams, Yammer, Outlook, and some pros and cons, what to use and when and where, the audience, the speed of communication, things like that. And that's a free ebook that you can just download there. Oh, by the way, all these slides, you don't have to copy out this URL, take a screenshot of it. These will also be sent out to you. Okay, the second tip that I have is for those that have started in teams or been dealt with that hand, how do we enforce the properties or the classification to help kind of drive that search and maybe sprinkle in a bit of naming convention there, just to those teams that are newly created, they get some face value there. But how do we also do it without kind of, hovering over those end users and making sure we crack the whip, especially now that everyone's working from home? So how I've seen it done, and I've kind of seen it done in 3 different ways. So the first method is that for provisioning teams, they've kind of released it to everyone, and then they've kind of seen how bad it is and then quickly turned it off, which has kind of a negative effect of what I've seen, where people have gotten used to this brand new shiny toy. They love teams, like they love the usability of it, the concept of chat, the concept of creating a team just like that, right? But then you've taken it away from them. Think of that like you've given a toddler a new shiny toy. Take it away from them, what do? Cause a tantrum, and then they create a muck. And that muck, from an organization standpoint, is they email themselves a document. They create themselves a WhatsApp chat and start from there. And what that means is that communication basically leaks out, that corporate information leaks out to the big bad world, which now we have even less control over. The other way I've seen it is that they've kind of bottlenecked it so that only the people in IT can create those teams. But then that problem is that as teams goes on, people love it more, there's a lot more requests. And now IT's dedicated job is now accepting teams or rejecting teams or creating teams on their behalf, right? Not something that I probably signed up for originally. The other method is basically they had a security group, and people only in that security group are the ones that can create a team. So a perfect example would be people that are the department heads, right? Or maybe people that are part of the C-level team, someone a bit more elevated within the organization that understands the ins and outs of what comes with the team and what kind of problems and features that it provides with us. But all these people, right, across those 3 spectrums, they all need to be trained and certified in order to understand the concept of teams, right, to ensure that it meets company policies, and ensure that they're created with a purpose and are compliant, right? What we've seen, or what we've tried to, a way to combat that is essentially providing a kind of a template. This templated approach kind of makes sure that it's a cookie cutter way of having those locations created. It's kind of a foolproof way. You're taking them the one rabbit hole where they can go ahead and create those teams. How unfortunately, that has, it requires a bit of programmatic using Graph API. However, there are third-party solutions like AppPoint, such as the MyHub, that gives you a kind of like a catalog experience where you can pick and choose through an interface that allows them to go ahead and for an end user surface what options are available. And I'll showcase what that looks like in a little bit. So in this concept, Sam, part of the marketing team, he goes into the Teams application developed by AppPoint called MyHub, and he fills out a customized request. And that request might be driven by his manager or a conjoint through his manager and maybe someone from IT and maybe someone through the compliance side of things as well. But essentially in this form, all he has to do is enter in the team name, put in the members, so who's going to have access to that location, whether there's going to be external sharing on or not, and whether it be private or public. Once he fills in that form, it'll go through to IT. So once he fills out the form, it doesn't instantly create him a team. Someone has to review and making sure that Sam has filled in the form correctly. So in this case, we've passed it over to IT. IT have now gotten a notification and they can say, yep, Sam has filled this in quite correctly. And there's no other team like that so that it can essentially join them without having to recreate that wheel. So all IT has to do is click yes, or if they want, they can edit some of Sam's details or that form to make sure it's compliant, maybe just miss a couple of options here and there. But all they have to do is submit, and the governance solution will essentially read that form, follow the kind of like recipe list, and create the teams based on what Sam's requested. After that's created, Sam gets an email saying, hey, your request has been approved, and then he gets a team. He can go on off and do his thing. But on the back end, how we can essentially manage that going forward, but also making sure that once the project finishes, we essentially clean it up. What we'll do is apply what we call an inactivity policy, and sometimes a lease, an expiration, a way to essentially automatically clean up that team once it's finalized. And this is something that Sam doesn't have to essentially worry about. Hey, what are the timeframes? How do I clean it up? What's that process look like? Or who do I have to contact? That's all automatically bolted on because of how we've driven it higher up. In the case that there is a team that is exactly what Sam has created, IT in that case might say no, and Sam can get a bit of closure instead of waiting till a week or a month's time. What's happened to that team? Sam will just get a notification that his request has been rejected. So let's see what that looks like, basically within Live. So here is the team application, and essentially what this is an app that you can install through the team store. And to showcase what that experience looks like, I'll just go start a request. And here you can see a catalog of services, right? At the moment, we only have the one. Makes it nice and easy. In this case, I'll create an AppPoint team. And all I have to do as an end user is just answer a couple questions. So in this case, I'll put in a request summary. So I need a new customer presentation 2020. Right, I can put in the notes to approver. But automatically, because of the properties that I have in Azure AD, this is pre-filled and kind of classified some of this information on my behalf without me having to actually able to do anything. And of course, I can't change this field because I am actually in the TSP department. And other things that have already been pre-canned for me, such as like the language, and allowing me to send copies of the conversation to people's inboxes if I wanted to as well. However, I also have the option of not bugging everyone and deselecting that. So all these questions that you're seeing here, they can be customizable to the language that you guys use within your organization. Continuing on, basically because I'm the one requesting for this location, this has pre-filled me in as the primary contact because I should be the one that knows the ins and outs of what's going to happen to this team. What's the purpose of it? Hey, if you want to join it, you know who to reach out to. So we've put in this field as a primary team contact. But as my manager, this is again looking at Azure AD and pre-filled this secondary team contact, just in case anything, if I don't respond, they have a point of escalation. Down below for the team owners, it's always best practice to have 2 team owners in case something does happen to one of them, so that you do have that secondary layer and you don't have kind of what we call orphan teams. So this is filled in myself as the requester and also my manager, Daryl. And then all I've really had to do now is fill in who else is going to join this team. So I can put in people's names. I'll just type in Bruce. Or down below I can select the actual people. And then I'll put in Alex. Right, just who's going to join this location. Alternatively, what we have is dynamic membership. And so this is something that Microsoft does provide as well. But we'll talk about it in a little bit, but it does require a bit more deeper pockets just to get this functionality. So in this case, if I wanted to create a team, more so for my department to share, some cool new features that Microsoft's providing with Teams, what I can do is just based on these certain rules to say the contact information and the department equals the TSP. That's just my team there. Without having to know every single person, their name or their email address, this condition will essentially invite everyone in that department. But at our point, we are a global company. So what I might do is just to trim it a bit more, I'll just say that I want the office to be Australia as well. Because I just only want to share these golden nuggets and keep it to ourselves. Right. So in this case, it's only inviting people in my department and only for the Australian office. So excluding people in marketing and in HR and in the sales department. Maybe because this is a bit more in the weeds compared to what they're probably a bit more bored of it. Right, and lastly here is just the Teams policy. This Teams policy will essentially drive that inactivity, the lease, the expiration, those other objects that I don't necessarily need to be aware of. But by default, there is a 3-month renewal. So what this will mean is in 3 months time, it'll just email myself. Hey, we've noticed that you haven't touched this team in maybe 2 weeks. Do you still need it or not? Or an automatic trigger at that 3-month time. It's been 3 months. That's what you've said you needed it for. Do you still need that or not? Otherwise, we'll clean it up or we can extend that duration for you. That's a perfect example in case, projects do need to extend or they've been pushed back a little bit because of people a bit more are tighter around their wallets now. The last option, and this is all flexible. You can hide this or you can have it mandatory like we have here. All right, it's just configuring how the what kind of functionality you're enabling into this team. Right. So, for example, I could be very boring and not allow any GIFs or not allow any memes. So this is just pure get to work content. And then finally, what we have is just metadata. So this is how we can drive those properties, enforcing that there is at least a minimum these 3 fields that have been entered in, right? So straight away, we can see there's three values that I can select from. But to me as an end user, I have no idea what these even talking about. So what we have is just a tooltip, and then you can customize this language to whatever you want. Basically saying, giving you the end user a bit more information on what these 3 values even mean. Down the bottom, this is how we can drive this naming convention by ensuring that the metadata that is selected, right? This can drive the prefix and the suffix. But again, we can also use properties within Azure AD to also predetermine what that team is going to be called. So in this case, all I've had to do, again, is just put 2020. Once I hit submit, that kicks off that process where my manager, maybe Daryl, will get a notification saying, hey, Victor has requested for a team and this is what he's selected. Is that still fine? Daryl can then go ahead and approve it, reject it, and edit any of these fields if he feels the needs to. And this is one of the ways that we can essentially ensure that there's a proper process in terms of creating one of these teams going forward. Now, onto the third tip. So the third tip, this is where we kind of want to maintain the access and the ownership of those locations, simply because we're giving this kind of trust and responsibility to those end users, those team owners. So you might have, for example, an intern that has just created a team on behalf of instructions from his manager. Now we're expecting that intern to basically manage all the security and permissions. That's something that's a bit of a hit and miss. Not something I'd stake my life on, essentially, is what I'm trying to say, right? They will have a better idea for sure who should have access to that location. And it shouldn't be someone from IT that has no idea what this project's around and who should be involved with it, internal or external. They should be the ones to make this decision. It should be actually the team owners, what we see. So to invoke a process around this, here we have a couple of examples where maybe depending on the size of the team, maybe the sensitivity of the content, we can trigger how regular we want to trigger that process. Once every 3 months, 6, 12, 4, whatever have you, right? And it really depends on some of those questions of what is that team even used for to begin with. But this is essentially giving that responsibility to that end user to clean up and making sure that those people in that team have the correct access and are the right people to have access. So in this process, Jessica, she'll get a notification that she has a task to do, and she'll be presented with a list of users, whether they'll be internal, external, but also what kind of level of permission they have. So whether they're a member or an owner, or from a SharePoint perspective, whether they have full control, edit, read, things like that. Jessica now has the power to then chop and change those permissions to how she likes. So come the project's finished, we want to now remove all the external contractors from that location, right? Ensuring there's a process around it. Jessica can then remove those external users, submit this out, but again, there's a set of human eyes on it in case, Jessica kind of goes a bit rogue and removes everyone from it. Before it kicks off, we can say that Jessica's manager gets a notification and that list of reports that Jessica's filled out. Just following that audit trail and workflow process. As I said before, Microsoft does have some of those capabilities, but it does require an Azure AD Premium license. But it also means that you have to also ensure that your Azure AD is squeaky clean. So in case that people do jump to different departments or they leave the organization, just making sure that you stay on top of it, or else this Azure AD kind of doesn't have that functionality available. All right, while we're in the process of creating a team, there is the concept of public, private, and organizational wide. And when teams first released, they had the concept of public team being the default team. Now, to end users and first seeing teams, what this meant to them, and then this is how they interpreted it, was that a public team, this means that it's not just a team for me. Other people can be invited to this team. So what they did was they either clicked next just to get the team that they wanted, get a workspace, or they had that interpretation that people could join the team. And that was the default option for Microsoft. They obviously quickly changed that because of the misinterpretation, and now private is the default option there. But essentially, as for those that don't know, private is a team that only you have access to unless you invite other people into that team, or other owners invite other members into that team, and that's the only way they can get access to it. Public is essentially, it's a free-for-all. Anyone can join that team if need be, right? They can see it, they can search for it, things like that. And then organizational wide. Organizational wide is where everyone is automatically added to this team. So again, just that simple concept where for a public team, as you can see here, if we look into the peoples and group section within SharePoint, basically it's anyone that everyone can see and access this team if need be, just except external users. So they can view content, they can join the team whenever they need to. So for those that are still sticking around, there is a prize that we are giving away the third week that we have here. So pull out your phones and I'll give you a couple minutes just to scan the QR code and making sure that you are registered. That's one of the eligibilities to be entered in this competition. Scan the QR code and you follow the prompts and you'll be able to enter yourself in. For those that don't have your phone, or maybe it's still on charge or it's out of battery, I'll have this slide at the end of it as well, just in case people have missed it. Okay, so the fourth tip. Okay, the fourth tip is establishing your retention policy. Now, we've talked about teams a lot. However, I feel this applies to your work life as well. For me, I've found that because the weekends are kind of the same as your Monday to Friday, your days feel really stretched out. There's no real differentiator between weekends and your home life and your work life. So as an example, what I've made sure to do is I've penciled in a reoccurring schedule once every day for between 12 to 1, just for my lunch break, just so I can make sure I can have a meal to myself, or chat to my dog, or just have a bit of me time, right? This just allows you to break up the day and have kind of like that regular routine that you would have in your workspace or if you were back at work, and also gives you a time to kind of relax and regenerate yourself. What we also did when we were back at work is that we did coffee runs at 2 p.m. every day. So to recreate that experience, what we created was, again, a daily meeting at 2 p.m. where maybe for about 10 minutes, 15, where we go out and just have a break. But we'll do it over Teams where we're just all drinking coffee and catching up what's happened over the weekend or any funny stories that we've seen. So just making sure that you apply kind of a retention policy to your day-to-day life. But from a team's perspective as well, what we can look at is kind of the same case, giving those teams a break so that, once they're finished, let's maybe archive that off or remove it so that it helps your users search for content, making sure that what they see is what's actually relevant still within the organization, but overall just helping reduce a lot of that sprawl. So as an example, again, we're looking at what kind of content that is. So if it's for a project that we know it's 6 months, we'll send an automatic notification after that 6-month period. However, maybe if it's an organizational-wide team or maybe an office team, for example, maybe we'll set it for a longer period of time, right? So different projects and even different departments, they all work on different schedules, different timeframes. So making sure that it's accommodating for all aspects on that spectrum. So as an example, and this is perfect for, I had a university here in Melbourne where they rolled out Teams and they, for some reason, released it out to the students. So some of the funniest team names I've seen has come from the university where one of them was Fortnite Strats. Another one was the Game of Thrones, I think season 7 back in the day, discussions, and a Microsoft Teams for dank memes. So you get those teams, and that creates a mailbox. That is now a Microsoft Teams for dank memes mailbox. That is now a site collection, also with that name, right? Something that's not necessarily useful to the organization. So we wanted a way to clean that up without having to go ahead and look into interrogate each and every one of those owners or even looking inside that team and looking into the content. So what we've done is we've allowed people to use the governance solution to import all those Office 365 objects, such as your site collections, your teams, and your groups. And it's what I like to call the doomsday policy. And you can sugarcoat that if you wanted to make it a bit more of a nicer name. But essentially what this doomsday policy did was it sent a notification to those owners of those groups and teams, and it gave them a 2 weeks notice. And in that 2-week time frame, they have to respond whether they need that team or not, right? In the case that someone has responded and said, yep, I actually need that team, it's actually for proper work, what it'll do is it'll reset that inactivity counter and apply a proper policy, that 6-month or that 3-month or the 12-month one, and they can go ahead and continue doing their work. In the other case where they just said, hey, Fortnite is no longer cool, we want to now dispose of that team. So what we'll do is they can just say no, and that will go ahead and governance will remove that team automatically for them. Now, in the case that maybe that team owner has left, so we have an orphan team, or they just don't respond to that request. What is this governance solution in the first place? I have no idea what this is. This isn't part of my KPIs. I'm not going to respond, right? In that case, what we'll do is we'll escalate this to IT, and they can be the ones that make this decision. But as that safety net, we can't say hand on heart what kind of content's in this location, who has access to this location overall. So what we'll do is we'll set it as, we'll archive this team, right? So no other changes can be made, but what we'll also do is remove all the permissions so that no one else can access this content because we're not sure whether it's sensitive or not. And then once we've done our checks, we've done our investigation, then we can choose to maybe reassign a new team owner, or we can go ahead and clean up that team up as well. So the kind of the workflow processes, kind of tackling all kind of challenges and obstacles that we can meet, just to ensuring that we clean up a lot of those workspaces, ensure that the workspaces that we have make sense to the organization. The to kind of help you, a nice little cheat sheet to help you understand what teams should be used and how to, and what time frame or what process do we use to clean it up. Ask yourself this. So do you have any regulations do you need to meet? Such as, like, for Victoria, we have the VERSE compliance, for example, but also, are you managing any records? So if you need to dispose of any documents as well, and do they have a retention period, retention process and disposal process as well? Making sure that as part of this expiration process that you're making sure that you're meeting those regulations as well. Right. And for groups and teams, there is the concept, and we'll go into a bit more about this, the concept of archiving and deletion and what to use when and where, right? But also making sure that because we're applying this essentially a new policy that helps the different departments work, making sure that they agree to this as well, or else you kind of don't want to throw a new policy that essentially cleans up their environment, and then you just get a bunch of support tickets or just angry people that are asking, hey, what happened to my content? Why is this a read only? I can't access this information. So making sure that you're pretty transparent around the business, and so they're understanding and agree to these disposal policies as well. All right. So we'll get into the concept of archiving a team. Basically, this is something that a team owner or any team owner can do, where they can go ahead and archive a team. And what that will essentially do is it'll essentially put a freeze on all the content, such as like your content within SharePoint, your team's applications, your content in there as well. But it doesn't necessarily put a freeze on the actual people. So people can still add and remove users, which isn't really necessarily a freeze to me, really, because you can't really don't have that concept of who did have access at that time. It might have changed at one point in time, but it's essentially what this archive does. Puts a freeze on the content so no other changes can be made going forward. All right. That is a concept of deletion, and what Microsoft does has enabled is similar to the dynamic membership, is a depending on how deep your pockets are with that Azure AD Premium license, it allows you to create a policy to automatically dispose of certain locations. However, I found this as a kind of a cookie cutter approach, where you kind of have a one-size-fits-all, a one policy that everyone needs to adhere to, or only some departments have this policy rolled out. That's not necessarily the case, because for sure legal will need to keep certain locations or content for maybe 99 years, or even just hold it indefinitely, right? Whereas some that are maybe on a higher churn rate, maybe just one, maybe a maximum of 7 years, for example. So it's very difficult just having that one approach that fits all, but also making sure that also everyone's happy. Again, we have the retention policy for teams, where you could select different criteria, such as like, hey, the name meets this, or the creation date equals to this, making sure that it is actually disposed after that 7-year period. These are policies that you can create under the admin center and security compliance location to automatically clean up some of these environments as well. I know Microsoft has a kind of a technical article. I think it's like a pretty lengthy one, like a 25,000 word one, but it shows you the different concepts of creating a disposal policy, a retention policy for your groups, your chat, your Skype, your Skype and SharePoint, and they all kind of have different features that you need to be aware of, such as like private channels. Don't think that's supported at the moment. Will be soon. But also like the caveats of creating a policy for SharePoint, creating a policy for Exchange as well. There will be a link to that article within the presentation as well. All right, so tip number 5. Basically what this is addressing is deploying a bot for your frequently asked questions. So this is perfect for things like, hey, I want to know the company policy around travel, or expense policies, things like that. Right, something that you could easily ask a bot instead of constantly bugging your HR. Also very much a good look. But what we've released is AppPoint Virtual Assistant, Ava for short. So basically what Ava does is it looks into and helps your end users restore their own content. Instead of going through the usual process of having to create a support ticket and then pushing that over to the service desk, and then that back and forth of, hey, is this the document that you're after? Oh, wait, no, is this the one? Instead, you're kind of giving that responsibility back to the end users where they can go ahead and do their own restorations. So this is free. You can download this now. Again, you'll just be looking at the recycle bin only. As an example, all you have to do is go to the App Store, download Ava, and this is the kind of experience that you'll get. So as an end user, what I can say is I can restore something in my OneDrive, my email, something in Teams, or even something in my conversations. But we've security trimmed it to only these 4 objects because we don't want to give them exposure into something like SharePoint, which is, if they restore that, it might impact more people than we hope, because we might have an intranet in SharePoint. So this is only security trimmed to content that they personally have access to, such as your OneDrive and Exchange, right? But it gives them that seamless experience without having to dig within the recycle bin. But also the concept of what happens after the default retention of 93 days, right? Or 14 days within Exchange. So past that 14 days, that content is automatically purged within the recycle bin. So this is why AppPoint has a backup solution that can help cover all of your objects, Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, your groups and teams, but also giving you the flexibility of restoring full fidelity with all the properties and security at a granular level, but also indefinitely. So if you want to restore that content from 2016, you can do so. But in this concept with Ava, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Ava, hey, I want to restore an email, right? I'll put in some details, some ammunition that Ava can use to fill in and help find that piece of information that I'm after, right? I can put in the subject, the sent to, from, things like that. In this case, I've typed in the word Microsoft as a subject, and it's gone ahead and based off that criteria, find some information for me, which I can then go ahead and restore that. So this is all something as an end user I can do myself without having to bug anyone else. Okay. On to the 6th tip. So encourage teams collaboration and kind of have that single source of truth for teams to work into. So as an example, here at AppPoint, Teams is all I use. I have all my conversations, my calendars there, all my posts, all my files. It's all there for me to work on there. So here's an example of how one of our marketing teams looks like, where we have Joanne. Joanne's just posting a couple of messages to the global team around one of the campaigns that she's running. But as you can see down the left side there, some of the tabs that kind of categorize the different components that the marketing teams work on. And then on the top, there's your different tabs for your frequently related content around the general tab, the general channel, sorry, or the requests. So as an example, here's one that we have here in Australia, where we have the different teams per different departments. We've got our marketing team. We've also got our Australia-wide team, and we also have got the different departments such as sales and our TSP ones. But as you can see here, if we go to the general one, we have your frequently accessed information such as your client documentation, your presentations, your stuff for new starters, but also everything's categorized per, in this case, our solutions. So that's just one of the examples that you can use just to break up your team and making sure it's all neat and tidy, kind of built like an intranet there. Right, and one of the cool features that Teams has is kind of breaking up how we used to collaborate and kind of using Exchange as like your file share location, where people would go ahead and send a document over email, and then you get just multiple copies of different changes. So you'll have like, this is a policy document, or this is a statement of work that we're working on, or a proposal, but then you'll have a dash, and then the person that edited it, Victor, Joanne, Claire, things like that. And then you'll have your underscore ones. This is the true final, things like that. And it's just a whole mosh pit where you don't know which one's the correct one, which one do I use. So Teams allows you to actually collaborate within the application, right? Word, PowerPoint, Excel, things like that. But it consolidates the whole chat on the right side where you can basically see all the comments. And for people that just join the team, they can follow the thread and see what's happening in the history of that document. Cool things, also another cool things that you can do is put in forms such as requests for leave, as an example, business processes that you can automate to essentially take them to new material that each end user could use, such as like requests for new information, submitting travel policies or expenses, things like that. So that's cool stuff that you could build within Power Apps and just simply link that into the tab. Teams allows tabs across multiple third-party applications to essentially just maximize what the end user experience looks like. Within meetings, you can also draw cool imagery. So in case that you're having a bit of difficulty explaining the concept, I mean, for me, I'm a bit more graphical as well. So having to articulate it within pretty pictures and colors, right, makes the messaging a lot stronger. And so that you can also collaborate on this messaging and pass over any feedback as well. And that's just something throughout that's available throughout the Teams meetings. So what we want to emphasize is just the one-stop shop for your entire organization that we can all bolt on into Teams, right? Where you can have your chats, your calls, your collaboration of documents, your intranet as well. Basically, with everything that you're recording within Teams, it gets bolted into Stream, which you're essentially automatically building out your LMS portal as well. So Teams, what we do now with our point is just that single collaboration point where everything's netted with and intertwined with each other, and different departments can work together within the same application. The last tip, tip number 7, is facilitate inclusion and drive culture. And I'll show you some examples of kind of what Teams has done, especially fast track a lot of the features, especially within meetings, but also things that we've done here at our point to kind of drive a social interaction. So like I said before, you can record your town hall updates. It's what we do now at our point, where in case you've missed a meeting, because it's recorded, automatically uploaded to the stream, which you can always just quickly join and watch that stream. Right? You can use live captions just in case for those that are hard of hearing or just have a lot of noise in the background and just want to read the text. Microsoft does provide live captions while you're talking live in the meeting. But also just released, I think a couple of weeks ago, was the raise hand functionality. So in case that you're doing a town hall and you have a question to your CEO, for example, you can quickly raise your hand instead of trying to talk over your different colleagues. Teams also provides inline translations as well. So this is perfect for those that work on a global scale as well, such as at point. At point, we have people in Japan, Singapore, China as well, and also in Europe. So all over the shop. We can all work on the same team, but also using this translate function to understand where they're coming from. For those that go above and beyond, let's recognize them for their efforts. So you can send out praises in case they do help out with any of the work that you're doing. Just give them a shout out. But also what I'll sometimes do is just put a smile on their face, send them a funny meme. One of the examples that we have here at our point is we have a dedicated channel called Gong It. And that channel is for any dedicated feedbacks that we want to present to the wider organization. All right, we can call someone out and detail exactly what they've done. Just expressing our gratitude to their efforts and helping us achieve our end goal. And just some of the fun things that we've done is, so with a lot of organizations, there's still happy hour on Fridays, just over remote. So catch up with a beer at 4 p.m. And just see what's happened within the week. Any funny stories that you guys want to share, do that over a quick bev. stay active. So we have a daily session at around, I think about 7 or 7:30, where we'll follow a YouTube video altogether. You can have your webcam on, if it's all optional, but it allows you to keep fit, stay active, especially within the times that we have confined in our home. One of the examples that we've done just last week was for Mother's Day. We did a guess the baby face, basically, where we all uploaded our baby pictures, and we had to guess who was who. And then the one after that, we did a cooking class for Anzac Day, where we were following one person, and he was making Anzac Day biscuits, and basically we're following that recipe and all making Anzac biscuits all alongside each other. Some didn't turn out pretty well, some did, but there was photos to share, but it was all good fun. But in the end, just to close things up, let people be people. Even though we have this massive disjoint with how we communicate and interact with each other, we're social animals in the end. So just trying to make the light of the situation that we're in by providing these fun and games and interactions, just to make that have something to look forward to at the end of the week, on that Friday, for example, but also providing a bit of spice into that life. Just to close things out again, we have, for those that are struggling and just have been dealt with that card of rolling out teams, we have a working from home jumpstart. That is a 3-month free offering of that governance solution that I just showed you before to help you control that team sprawl there. And for those that are still on premise, on your file share in SharePoint, what we're providing now is a free offering to migrate your content into the cloud so you can work remotely into 365 and bring along your content. But alongside that offering as well, we're providing a free backup. That's on the condition of a backup purchase as well of 1 year. So if you purchase 1 year worth of backup, we'll provide you a free migration to it as well. And just for additional collateral, in case you want a bit more information, we have a couple more eBooks that you can go ahead and read and download. Right? Again, we'll send you the links to this PowerPoint, but also in, I think, about 2 weeks' time, I'm doing another virtual workshop where we're basically going through the functionality of Teams to help kind of your end users, and you can invite them into these workshops as well. They can follow along, and we'll go through some cool tips and tricks and basic functionality of Teams as well to help people work from home. So that's on the 27th of May at 1 to 3 p.m. A big shout out to all the sponsors for making this virtual conference happen. Do appreciate everything that they've done for us, and especially with our organizers as well. All right, now on to some questions. Let's see. Just loading up for me. Nope, either that or I was on mute the whole time, or for me it's just loading.
Victor, I can read out the questions for you.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I know what's going on.
First one is, in your opinion, what are the advantages and disadvantages of having an organization-wide team? Can an org-wide team work if the organization has more than 10,000 staff members?
Oh, okay. There is the limitation that Microsoft does have for organizational-wide teams. Not sure if they've escalated or escalated that number due to what we have now. There is a limit to it, but essentially that organizational-wide team just provides that centralized experience. Instead of having, like, for example, your Yammer, you can still all work together within that one application. And that's how kind of where I see it, where you don't have to have a separate tab open to ask any questions. You can do everything within your department teams and then your organizational-wide teams.
I think, can I add a couple of cents, if that's okay? Go for it. Hi, everybody. This is Lorraine Strant here, one of the organisers, and I live and breathe teams and work with our point a fair bit. Because there's a hard limit, what will effectively happen is if you have 10,001 staff members,
And please enjoy the rest of the other sessions that are scheduled for the rest of May.